The single, simple fact that the American GI carried a semi-automatic rifle capable of firing 8 shots in less than 10 seconds, while the German and Japanese infantry were stuck reloading after every single shot, is arguably the most decisive technological gap of World War II. This fourfold increase in sustained firepower was, as General Patton famously stated, the greatest battle implement ever devised. This superiority didn't come from a new explosive or a bigger tank. It came from a simple, elegant piece of engineering that changed the tempo of warfare overnight. Compelling evidence. The M1 Garand increased the effective rate of fire for an individual infantryman from around 10 to 12 rounds per minute, with the bolt-action M1903 to 40-50 rounds per minute, giving the U.S. infantry a disproportionate advantage in firefights and suppressing fire that statistics barely capture. This sheer volume of fire often led German and Japanese forces to mistakenly report facing machine gun nests, when, in reality, it was just a few American soldiers with M1 rifles. Insightful expert quote. Military historians often cite the M1 as a primary reason for the low comparative casualty rate of American infantry in sustained engagements, proving the adage that the best defense is overwhelming fire superiority. Vivid example. During the fierce fighting in the hedgerows of Normandy, squads equipped with the M1 were consistently able to suppress entire enemy positions that would have pinned down bolt-action armies. The rich explanation for this dominance lies in the psychological impact. The sustained, rapid tempo of the M1 broke the morale and tactical cohesion of enemy units. Firepower was the equalizer. Today, we're tracing the incredible, complex life of the M1 Garand rifle, how the persistence of one man gifted the American military, the defining weapon of the war, why its famous metallic ping sound became both a legend and a controversy, and the ingenious mechanics that allowed it to survive conditions that shattered other weapons. We'll dive deep into the political resistance the inventor faced, the overlooked reasons it used, a peculiar en-bloc clip, and the lasting legacy of the service rifle that armed a generation. Stay with us, because the subtle, technical reasons the rifle was so ruggedly reliable in the face of machine gun fire and jungle mud are even more fascinating than its battlefield exploits. Before we embark on the story of the M1, if you could swap one piece of World War II technology for a modern equivalent, what piece of equipment would it be, and why would that change the entire course of the war? Drop your answer in the comments. Your analysis of military effectiveness will give us a framework for understanding how the M1's simple innovation broke the stalemate of infantry combat. The M1 Garand is often seen as an inevitable piece of war production, but the surprising insight is that the rifle almost didn't happen at all due to years of bureaucratic inertia and bitter, highly political arguments over rifle design. The primary struggle was not technical, but cultural. The U.S. Army Ordnance Corps, conservative and dedicated to the powerful, accurate bolt-action M1903 Springfield, was deeply skeptical of the need for a semi-automatic rifle. Compelling evidence. The rifle's inventor, John Garand, an employee at the Springfield Armory, spent nearly 20 years pushing his design against committees that preferred traditional firepower over rapid fire. His early prototypes used different calibers and complex mechanical systems that failed initial testing, giving critics plenty of ammunition to halt the project. The struggle was often framed as accuracy versus volume. The old guard insisted the average soldier would waste ammunition and sacrifice precision with a semi-automatic weapon. Insightful expert, quote, General Julian Hatcher, a contemporary of Garand, noted that the rifle's final adoption required a bloodless revolution against senior officers who believed the only truly martial weapon was one that required the soldier to manually reload. Vivid example. Garand's earliest functional design, which used a fragile primer-actuated mechanism, exploded during testing in 1928, severely injuring a tester. This incident almost ended the semi-automatic dream entirely, but Garand persisted, returning with a simpler, gas-operated mechanism. The rich explanation for this political battle shows that inertia is the greatest enemy of innovation. Sometimes, the hardest opponent to defeat is the entrenched mindset within your own organization, not the enemy on the battlefield. Persistence was the patent. The process of adopting any major technology is inherently political. Never assume the best design wins. You must also win the bureaucratic battle. The development of the M1 was not a smooth process of linear improvement. It was a grueling, protracted, vivid scenario of trial, failure, and redesign, pushed forward almost single-handedly by John Garand's unwavering vision. Imagine the stifling, smoky testing ranges of the 1930s, where Garand and his small team continually modified prototypes to withstand conditions that would shatter lesser weapons. Their biggest challenge was developing a reliable gas system that could cycle the powerful 30U06 round without tearing the rifle apart or fouling up with dirt. Compelling evidence. The rifle's operating system, which directs gas from the muzzle to push the piston, was originally designed to tap gas at the breech, a more complicated system. After years of testing and failures, Garand was forced to simplify and move the gas port to the muzzle, a design known as the gas trap, which proved unreliable and was quickly replaced by the definitive gas port and piston system seen in final production. The decision to adopt the final system was not made until 1936, a timeline that proved terrifyingly close to the outbreak of global conflict, barely giving the armory time to scale up production. Insightful expert, quote, later engineers praised Garand's final gas system as perfectly balanced, using only enough force to cycle the action reliably, thereby minimizing recoil and maximizing the life of the internal components. Vivid example. One of the final tests involved intentionally burying the prototype rifles in sand and mud, then firing them immediately, forcing Garand to engineer clearances and tolerances that were exceptionally tight yet rugged. The rich explanation for this period of intense R&D reveals the core engineering philosophy. The rifle had to be simple enough to be field-stripped by a scared 18-year-old in the dark, yet robust enough to survive the Pacific monsoon and the dust of North Africa. Ruggedness was non-negotiable. Technology development must be guided by extreme, real-world stress testing. If a weapon can't survive the worst possible conditions, it is fundamentally a liability, not an asset. The M1's arrival in the hands of the American infantrymen was not met with universal acclaim. The initial reactions provide a unique personal anecdote that reveals the infantry's deep, almost superstitious loyalty to the older rifle. Soldiers trained on the accurate, familiar M1903 Springfield initially found the M1 too heavy and too bulky, a full 2 pounds heavier than the older rifle, and its semi-automatic function initially felt confusing and complex. Compelling evidence. Drill sergeants had to completely rewrite the manual of arms, changing decades of training focused on disciplined, slow reloading to rapid, sustained fire. The soldiers' primary complaint, however, was psychological. The M1's lack of immediate accuracy when fired rapidly initially undermined their confidence in the weapon compared to the precision of the bolt-action rifle. Insightful expert, quote, one veteran recalled, when they handed me the Garand, it felt like a club. I missed my old 03, until the first time a Japanese machine gun opened up on me. Then that Garand felt like the best friend I ever had. Vivid example. The transition required a massive psychological shift in doctrine. Squad leaders were trained to suppress enemy fire instantly, exploiting the M1's high rate of fire rather than waiting for ideal sighting conditions. The rich explanation for the eventual universal acceptance is performance. Once troops experienced the pure, life-saving advantage of semi-automatic fire in a desperate situation, their initial reservations about weight and complexity vanished instantly, forging a deep, lasting loyalty to the rifle that had saved them. Hesitation was fatal. New tools require a fundamental shift in strategy and psychology. Adoption is never complete until the user trusts the tool with their life in the field. The M1 Garand represents a thought-provoking piece of advice regarding combat philosophy. That volume of fire often trumps individual accuracy in the confusion of a firefight. This rifle codified the American doctrine of superior firepower at the individual level. The developers faced a binary choice: a highly accurate bolt-action rifle requiring specialized skill, or a moderately accurate semi-automatic that could pin down an entire enemy squad. They chose the latter, betting on the average soldier's ability to maximize output rather than precision. Compelling evidence. This design philosophy directly contributed to the American way of war, which prioritizes overwhelming material advantage to reduce friendly casualties. The sustained fire from the M1 allowed fire and maneuver tactics to become the standard for the U.S. Army, keeping the enemy pinned down while the second half of the squad advanced, a luxury bolt-action armies could not afford. Insightful expert, quote, General Patton's praise, calling it the greatest battle implement ever devised, was a clear endorsement of this philosophy. The rifle was valued not for its elegance, but for its ruthless efficiency in saving American lives. Vivid example. In contrast, the German K98 Mauser rifle, while arguably more accurate at long range, forced the German infantrymen to pause after every shot, instantly ceding the fire superiority initiative to the American forces. The rich explanation for the M1's effectiveness shows that the best technology is that which amplifies the natural advantages of the force using it. In this case, America's ability to mass-produce reliable, high-performing weapons. Speed meant survival. When designing a tool for conflict, prioritize maximizing the user's continuous advantage. The weapon that dominates the speed of engagement often dictates the outcome. Why did the M1 Garand use that peculiar disposable 8-round en-bloc clip that ejected with a distinctive metallic ping, instead of the simpler, more common detachable box magazine used by nearly every other modern rifle? It's an intriguing question rooted deep in the rifle's long development history and a desire for maximum simplicity. Compelling evidence. The primary reason was cost and reliability. Early detachable box magazines for powerful military cartridges were notoriously heavy, prone to jamming, and expensive to manufacture in the millions needed for mass production. The en-bloc clip, patented by Garand, allowed the rifle to be loaded instantly as a unit by simply pressing the clip directly into the receiver, and its simplicity made the mechanism less vulnerable to dust and mud, which was a critical factor in jungle warfare. Insightful expert quote: John Garand himself preferred the en-bloc system because it held the ammunition securely and applied constant, even pressure to the rounds, feeding them reliably into the chamber, something early box magazines struggled to do under adverse conditions. Vivid example. The dual fact here is that the 8-round clip capacity was a compromise. The Army initially preferred a 5-round clip for tradition, and the distinctive ping sound that alerted the enemy when the clip was empty was entirely unintended. The rich explanation for this design choice shows the paradox of military development. A choice made for simplicity and reliability created a notorious acoustic signature that became a permanent part of the rifle's combat legend, illustrating how utility and unintended consequence are intertwined. Simplicity creates legends. When solving a design problem, choose the simplest mechanism that maximizes reliability. Utility is often the source of the most memorable quirks. While the M1 Garand is celebrated as the pinnacle of reliability, the surprising insight is that the early production models were plagued by a series of overlooked flaws that nearly crippled the rifle upon its introduction and required an immediate, massive recall and redesign. The challenge was maintaining precision across millions of mass-produced units. Compelling evidence. The first flaw was the early gas system, which, as mentioned, was replaced by the superior piston design. However, the most immediate issue was with the operating rod, which tended to bend or break under sustained use, a major liability in combat. This required the Springfield Armory to stop production and issue a bulletin detailing a series of modifications to the operating rod. A costly and embarrassing early failure that was quickly rectified, but remains a critical note in the rifle's history. Insightful expert quote: Ordnance historians note that the early failures show the difficulty of transitioning a perfect prototype into mass-produced combat gear. The extreme tolerances required for the gas system were difficult to maintain under the pressure of wartime production. Vivid example. During the initial deployments in the Philippines, soldiers reported instances of the operating rod jamming when subjected to heavy concentrations of dust and fine debris, forcing immediate field cleaning that exposed them to enemy fire. The rich explanation for the quick fix is the dedication of the Ordnance Department, which immediately deployed engineering teams to the field to assess and fix the issues on site, saving the rifle from a disaster that could have led to its replacement by an alternative design. Flaws demand honesty. Never hide or dismiss technical failures in the field. Rapid, honest acknowledgement of flaws is the fastest path to achieving true, lasting reliability. The famous metallic ping of the ejecting en-bloc clip created a vivid scenario in the trenches and jungles that defined the rifle's entire combat legacy. Imagine being a German or Japanese soldier, pinned down by a relentless hail of American fire, only to hear that high-pitched, unmistakable sound, a sound that signaled a fleeting moment of vulnerability for the enemy. Compelling evidence. While the ping is often cited as a flaw that alerted enemies to reload time, contemporary combat reports and veteran accounts suggest the psychological effect was usually the opposite. The sound was so unique and so frequently followed by renewed bursts of fire that it often paralyzed the enemy. The American practice was to immediately charge or toss a grenade upon hearing the ping of their own rifle, exploiting the brief pause before the enemy could react to the perceived opportunity. Insightful expert quote: Military psychologists have argued that the sudden, sharp, alien sound of the ping after prolonged suppressing fire often amplified the enemy's feeling of isolation and demoralization far more than the sound of a simple bolt cycling. Vivid example. There are many stories, often exaggerated, of enemy soldiers deliberately seeking the sound to gain an advantage, only to find the Americans had already reloaded or, worse, were using the ping as a bait to draw out attention. The rich explanation is that the speed of the M1's reload, an average of 5 seconds compared to 10 to 15 seconds for a bolt action, turned the perceived flaw into a strategic bluff, allowing the GII to dominate the mental tempo of the exchange. The ping was a feint. Analyze your weaknesses, not just for damage, but for potential strategic leverage. A known vulnerability can be weaponized into an effective psychological tool. The Garand's semi-automatic operation was a total game-changer, giving the American infantryman an enormous, surprising insight into the power of sustained individual suppression. This was the tactical revolution that General Patton truly championed. Previously, only light machine guns could provide this kind of volume, forcing an entire squad to protect one heavy weapon. The M1 democratized this capability, placing a form of suppressive fire into the hands of every soldier. Compelling evidence. The rifle's gas-operated system was remarkably effective at mitigating recoil, which meant that a soldier could fire multiple rounds on target much faster than with a bolt-action rifle, keeping the muzzle steady and the enemy's head down. This tactical advantage dramatically reduced the effectiveness of enemy snipers and machine gun positions, as any static position could be immediately deluged by concentrated, accurate fire from multiple points. Insightful expert. Quote, Brigadier General SLA. Marshall famously coined the phrase that the M1 gave the American soldier a new confidence in fire, allowing them to seize and maintain the initiative in the close-quarters combat that defined the war. Vivid example. In the Pacific, where the Japanese infantry relied heavily on sudden, concentrated charges, banzai attacks, the M1's capacity for immediate sustained response was absolutely crucial, often annihilating the charges before they could gain momentum. The rich explanation for this tactical edge is that the semi-automatic rifle shifted the paradigm from relying on small-scale, expert marksmanship to relying on coordinated, overwhelming fire superiority, making the average soldier exponentially more effective in a team. Volume is confidence. Focus your efforts on tools that elevate the baseline performance of your entire team. Collective fire superiority is far more devastating than scattered individual excellence. While the M1 became famous for its reliability, the rifle was subject to specific, unavoidable failures that led to a unique personal anecdote and some dangerous misconceptions among the troops. The vivid scenario of a Garand thumb injury is a soldier's worst fear when reloading in a firefight. The Garand thumb injury, where the charging handle slams down on the shooter's hand when a clip is improperly seated, was a rite of passage for many soldiers and required constant, careful training to avoid. Compelling evidence. The risk was so high that military training films were produced solely to teach soldiers the correct method of slicing. The thumb away at the precise moment the clip seated and the bolt slammed home, underscoring the lethal nature of the weapon's operation if treated carelessly. Insightful expert. Quote, Veterans often recount the injury not just as painful but as psychologically embarrassing, as it was a sign of rookie error in handling the weapon that was otherwise flawless. Vivid example. One veteran recalled a time his entire squad froze during a reload drill, terrified of the injury, only to be quickly disciplined by their sergeant who demonstrated the correct, swift movement, reminding them that fear of a jammed thumb was more dangerous than the thumb itself. The rich explanation for why this design flaw was accepted lies in the overall genius of the en bloc clip. The speed of reloading far outweighed the risk of the injury, provided the soldier followed protocol, reinforcing the idea that efficiency demands discipline. Pain-ensured discipline. Embrace training methods that are unforgiving of error. The physical consequence of a mistake often embeds the correct procedure more effectively than mere instruction. The M1's construction philosophy relied on a thought-provoking piece of advice, that simplicity in the field is more important than complexity in the factory. The rifle was engineered for rapid disassembly without tools, allowing GIs to perform maintenance under almost impossible conditions. Compelling evidence. The entire weapon breaks down into a handful of major components, held together by pins and levers, allowing a soldier in a muddy foxhole to strip and clean the rifle's operating system in minutes. This ability to quickly field strip the rifle was critical in the jungles of the Pacific, where humidity and fine coral dust would otherwise seize up the action of less forgiving mechanisms, a situation that doomed many sophisticated German rifles on the Eastern Front. Insightful expert quote, "Ordnance engineers were mandated to ensure the rifle could be assembled and disassembled, blindfolded, a practical test of its simplicity and the universal interchangeability of its mass-produced parts." Vivid example. The rifle's robust stock, traditionally made of walnut, was designed not just for strength, but also to protect the complex mechanical components from hard knocks and heavy rain, allowing the rifle to be submerged and still operate after a quick wipe-down. The rich explanation for this simplicity is that the high manufacturing tolerance allowed millions of parts to be interchangeable, meaning a soldier could grab a component from a non-functional rifle and fix their own instantly, a logistical advantage the Axis powers never achieved. Simplicity is survival. When designing systems for high-stress environments, ensure maintenance requires minimal resources. The time saved in the field is a direct contribution to mission success. Was the M1 Garand truly the best infantry rifle of World War II? Or is that merely a patriotic myth amplified by Hollywood? It's an intriguing question that demands a fair comparison of the rifle's capabilities versus its contemporaries, particularly the German K98 and the Soviet SVT-40. Compelling evidence. The M1 was, by far, the most widely adopted semi-automatic rifle of the conflict, with over 5.4 million produced. The German G43 semi-automatic was produced in fewer than 400,000 units, and the Soviet SVT-40 suffered reliability issues. This high production volume meant that the American Army was the only one that could afford to equip every single infantryman with a superior repeating rifle, fundamentally changing the dynamic of squad-level engagements on a global scale. Insightful expert quote, "Many German veterans admitted after the war that the sheer volume and speed of American fire were completely demoralizing, often mistaking a company of GIs for a concentrated battalion." Vivid example. The dual fact here is that the M1's effective range was over 400 yards, and that same weapon was used as the basis for the sniper variants, M1C and M1D, proving its inherent precision was often overlooked in its reputation for rate of fire. The rich explanation shows that the Garand's true advantage was the successful marriage of mass production capability with superior engineering, a feat no other nation could replicate under the duress of the war. Quantity possesses quality. Evaluate technology not just by its specs, but by its widespread decisive deployment. The most available weapon often dictates the victory. The M1's ultimate test of reliability was its performance against the constant moisture and dirt of the Pacific theater. And the surprising insight is how crucial a tiny, overlooked lubricant was to the rifle's sustained function. The M1 required careful lubrication of its operating rod and bolt to function reliably, a task that was difficult to maintain in jungle conditions where humidity and fine sand were constant enemies. Compelling evidence. The primary lubricant was known as LSA, lubricant, semi-automatic, a specialty oil that had to be applied meticulously, but if too much was applied, it would collect dust and sand, fouling the action. This delicate balance meant the M1 was not truly maintenance-free. It was, in fact, a weapon that demanded constant, specific attention from its user, a hidden cost often overlooked when discussing its ruggedness. Insightful expert quote, "Ordnance technicians discovered that many field failures in the Pacific were not due to design flaws, but to soldiers over-lubricating the rifle, a habit carried over from the older, looser-toleranced M1903. Vivid example. During the landings on Guadalcanal, many rifles initially malfunctioned until officers enforced a specific, sparse lubrication regimen tailored to the local environment, proving that soldier training was as important as the design itself. The rich explanation is that the rifle's tight tolerances, necessary for accuracy and reliability, made it susceptible to even minor amounts of fine debris, proving that even a near-perfect mechanical system is utterly reliant on the human element for success. Maintenance is muscle memory. The life cycle of a reliable tool requires continuous, specialized care. Neglecting the smallest maintenance step will ultimately guarantee the largest system failure. The M1 Garand defined the sound of victory for a generation, and the vivid scenario of its final major combat role, the Korean War, cemented its place in military history. Imagine the brutal, frozen landscape of the Korean Peninsula, where the M1 once again faced down enemies armed with newer, post-war designs, yet proved its enduring reliability. Compelling evidence. The rifle's ability to function reliably in the extreme cold of Korea conditions that often caused more complex automatic weapons to seize up was a testament to its simple, robust, gas-operated action. The M1 served as the primary U.S. service rifle for nearly the entire conflict, often providing fire support alongside the newly introduced M1 and M2 carbines, which lacked the M1's stopping power and reliability at range. Insightful expert quote: "The M1's success in Korea was less about superiority and more about availability, as millions were in storage, ready to be issued instantly." Vivid example. Many Korean War veterans cite the ability of the M1 to quickly deliver overwhelming fire to stop sudden, human wave attacks as the single most important factor in their survival on the front lines. The rich explanation for its success in this conflict is that the rifle's design maximized utility in adverse conditions, proving that simple, powerful reliability often outperforms complex novelty when the logistics are strained and the weather is brutal. Simple endures the cold. Never underestimate the value of battle-tested reliability over cutting-edge innovation. The weapon that works every time in the worst conditions is the ultimate strategic asset. The M1 was officially retired by the U.S. military after the Korean War, but the story of its decommissioning offers a unique personal anecdote that highlights the emotional bond between soldier and rifle. Soldiers were required to turn in their personal M1s for replacement by the select-fire M14 rifle, a move many veterans deeply resented. Compelling evidence. Many service members tried desperately to purchase or conceal their personal M1s, considering the rifle a personal talisman of their survival and service. The official Army documents contain countless requests from retiring NCOs petitioning to buy their specific service rifles, emphasizing the intense personal connection forged in combat that the bureaucracy failed to recognize. Insightful expert quote: "The curator of the Springfield Armory Museum noted that the M1 is unique because it's not just a rifle, it's the rifle of the greatest generation." Vivid example. One story recounts a sergeant who carved his initials and the date of his hardest battle into the stock of his M1, only to have to surrender it. Years later, he located and bought that exact rifle, identifying it by the unique carving he'd made decades before. The rich explanation for this emotional attachment is that the M1 Garand was the weapon that represented America's technological and moral commitment to the war effort, a symbol of individual power and national production that transcended mere functionality. Loyalty lasts a lifetime. Recognize that the tools used in moments of extreme crisis become powerful psychological symbols. The meaning of the artifact often outlives its original function. The legacy of the M1 Garand provides a thought-provoking piece of advice for modern engineering. Durability and modularity are timeless design principles. Although it was replaced by the M14 and then the M16, the M1's fundamental operating system lives on, influencing subsequent rifle designs across the globe. Compelling evidence. The Garand's simple, exposed operating rod and rotating bolt design were so efficient that they heavily influenced the design of the highly successful M14 rifle, which shares many internal similarities. The rifle's success also spurred the development of specialized rifle stocks and barrel weights for competitive marksmanship, creating a massive post-service life for the weapon in sporting and competitive circles. Insightful expert quote: "Modern rifle designers often refer to the M1 as the perfect mechanical puzzle because of how few parts it required to perform its complex function." Vivid example. Today, the M1 remains a highly sought-after collectible and competitive shooting rifle, prized for its accuracy and its satisfyingly heavy, reliable action, proving its durability over 80 years after its design. The rich explanation for this lasting legacy is that the rifle was designed for longevity and easy part replacement, a philosophy that ensured millions of its original components would survive and remain functional long after its official retirement. Quality ensures relevance. When designing a product, maximize its lifespan through durability and component standardization. A well-made legacy piece remains a benchmark for generations. Was the M1 Garand truly the best infantry rifle of World War II? Or is that merely a patriotic myth amplified by Hollywood? It's an intriguing question that demands a fair comparison of the rifle's capabilities versus its contemporaries, particularly the German K98 and the Soviet SVT-40. Compelling evidence. The M1 was, by far, the most widely adopted semi-automatic rifle of the conflict, with over 5.4 million produced. The German G43 semi-automatic was produced in fewer than 400,000 units, and the Soviet SVT-40 suffered reliability issues. This high production volume meant that the American Army was the only one that could afford to equip every single infantryman with a superior repeating rifle, fundamentally changing the dynamic of squad-level engagements on a global scale. Insightful expert, quote, "Many German veterans admitted after the war that the sheer volume and speed of American fire were completely demoralizing, often mistaking a company of GIs for a concentrated battalion." Vivid example. The dual fact here is that the M1's effective range was over 400 yards, and that same weapon was used as the basis for the sniper variants, M1C and M1D, proving its inherent precision was often overlooked in its reputation for rate of fire. The rich explanation shows that the Garand's true advantage was the successful marriage of mass production capability with superior engineering, a feat no other nation could replicate under the duress of the war. Quantity possesses quality. Evaluate technology not just by its specs, but by its widespread, decisive deployment. The most available weapon often dictates the victory. The story of the M1 Garand is the story of the rise of the semi-automatic rifle, and the surprising insight is how its success accelerated the end of the bolt-action era and dictated the future trend of all military small arms. The M1 proved, unequivocally, that the infantry weapon must maximize rate of fire. Compelling evidence. The M1's dominance forced the German military to rapidly accelerate development of their own semi-automatic and assault rifles, such as the StG-44, a direct response to the American volume of fire. This trend continued globally. After the war, virtually every major military power abandoned the bolt-action rifle as a standard infantry weapon, directly influenced by the M1's combat performance. Insightful expert, quote, "Post-war military analysts determined that the M1's effectiveness mandated a new minimum standard for infantry firepower." Vivid example. The future trend in small arms is dominated by fully automatic, modular, and lightweight assault rifles, but the shift from slow, precise fire to rapid, suppressive fire began with the M1, which was the final perfect step of the heavy battle rifle before the modern era. The rich explanation for this global pivot is that the M1 defined the maximum practical performance of a semi-automatic infantry rifle, setting a benchmark that all subsequent designers were forced to meet or exceed. The ancestor leads the way. Analyze historical innovations not just for what they did, but for the fundamental paradigm shift they enforced on the competition. The M1's legacy is the speed of its influence. The final test of the M1's legacy came in the form of a small, bizarre technical footnote that led to a unique personal anecdote: the gas cylinder vibration issue. Imagine the vivid scenario of a frustrated ordnance team trying to diagnose why certain rifles were failing to maintain accuracy after extended use. Compelling evidence. The rifle's gas cylinder, which attached below the barrel, would sometimes vibrate or rattle after thousands of rounds, minutely affecting barrel harmonics and degrading accuracy. This issue was difficult to diagnose in the field, as the flaw only became apparent under intense scrutiny, long after the weapon had already performed its primary duties in combat. Insightful expert, quote, "One engineer described the issue as the ghost in the machine, a tiny flaw that only revealed itself when the rifle was treated as a precision instrument rather than a battle tool." Vivid example. The mini-story involves competitive shooters finding that a simple, tightly fitting wooden wedge inserted beneath the gas cylinder could instantly resolve the vibration and restore competition-level accuracy, a solution later adopted by the Army for sniper variants. The rich explanation is that the M1's design was so focused on reliability in mud and dirt, which requires a certain amount of slop or clearance, that it sacrificed the absolute rigidity required for competition-grade accuracy, revealing the trade-off inherent in any combat design. Perfection is compromised. Recognize that every perfect design involves an acceptable trade-off. The compromises made for battlefield reliability often limit long-term competitive potential. The men who carried the M1 Garand, the soldiers of the greatest generation, returned home with an indelible bond to the rifle that had seen them through the war. Colonel Ewan Montague, though not a Garand carrier, understood the profound personal anecdote of a soldier's attachment to his weapon. Compelling evidence. The rifle's name, derived from the inventor John Garand, became synonymous with the infantry's spirit and resilience during the conflict. The final production count of 5.4 million M1 rifles made it one of the most widely issued and successful military products in history, guaranteeing its cultural immortality. Insightful expert, quote, "Montague wrote that the need for wartime lies was a temporary, terrible necessity, but peace is built on truth, not cleverness." Vivid example. Today, the M1 Garand is frequently featured in films and documentaries as the unmistakable sound and symbol of the American infantry. The rich explanation. Their legacy is a profound victory for wit over firepower, but it's a victory shadowed by the moral complexity of sacrificing the truth and the identity of a dead man for the greater strategic good of the Allies. The sound defined an era. The power of a weapon is ultimately measured by the stories and the survival it enabled. The true legacy of the M1 is the generation it empowered.